Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Hey, it's me, your host, Mark Swan, back again for some new weirditries. That's not a word. But anyway, I hope you're having a weird and wonderful week. I know I am. I get in this weird habit of indulging and oversaturating myself in a television or book or movie series that I haven't actually seen. And what I mean by that is I'm watching a bunch of video essays on Game of Thrones and what went wrong. And I haven't seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, nor do I intend to, but I seem to absorb the story and the elements just by listening to other people talk about them and what went wrong. And I think I'm more about how the sauce is made than the actual product. Like Game of Thrones, not really my bag. I saw the conceit of it and I said to myself, this isn't really for me. I'm not all about the violence and, sexual stuff. There's some themes there that I think are interesting, and I am a fantasy guy, but that wasn't really my thing. Regardless, I have been watching video after video and listening to podcasts of people criticizing the ending. I'm fascinated that the end was such a disaster. I seem to have a sick sense of enjoyment when something that's popular that I don't like doesn't end as it's supposed to, and it ticks a lot of people off. So I don't know. That's what I've been enjoying. So if you have any complaints about my hot takes for Game of Thrones, I know I'm like 6 or 7 months too late or something, but oh my gosh, I'm like a year too late. Go ahead and forward them to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Just kidding. I seem to like having some controversial fiction opinions on this podcast, and I've had people talk to me about it before. That being said, I am doing my darndest to get through Lord of the Rings, the book, not the movies, or the series of books, not the movies. I love the movies, and I tried to read the books in high school and just did a terrible job. Just wasn't for me, and it's still not really for me, but I'm getting through it. I'm about halfway through Two Towers, just trying to endure the flowery language, and every chapter someone stops to sing like this is Into the Woods. But Tolkien, I don't think he writes pop music. He's doing dirges and other classical sort of music writing, and so the songs, I just can't sing them in my head. It's very distracting. Anyway, that's what's going on with me. We've got a great show for you today. Actually, we've got kind of a gross show for you today, and for that I do apologize. This one might not be for the squeamish. In doing research for today's episode, I found some gross stories that just happen to be in the forefront of the news, and I figured that they were weird enough to talk about. So today we are talking drinking cow urine to cure COVID. Yeah, I'm for real right now. We are talking Gwyneth Paltrow's exploding candles, and that one doesn't sound gross at first, but if you've been paying attention to Gwyneth Paltrow recently, you'll know why this one is a little gross. And then we are talking a new South Carolina law that allows inmates to choose for their execution either going by the electric chair or by a firing squad. I didn't even know firing squads were still a thing in a first world country, but hey, it is a weird world after all, and it's not that much weirder than the electric chair. I don't know. Anyway, we'll get into that and more. And at the end of the show, speaking of books a little while ago, I have picked up a great book from Barnes & Noble called The Crime Book by the Big Ideas Simply Explained series. I think this is more of a young adult series, but it goes into a broad range of topics concerning all sorts of knowledge, either trivial or scientific. This is the crime book. It is a really great graphical representation of a lot of crime and criminals throughout the ages. And I'm going to end today's show with my top 5 lesser known criminals and their crazy acts that may just blow your mind. And without further ado, I say let's get right into it. Hey, it is May as of this recording of 2021, and I am a bit giddier than I thought I would be to announce that I think we're finally getting on the tail end of COVID, at least in Colorado, and I think in most of America. I am getting my second vaccination shot this weekend, and I am looking forward to it, but I'm also a little worried. I've heard that the second shot has some effects, fatigue, cold and flu symptoms and stuff like that, and I'm a baby when it comes to getting sick, so... But I am happy to say that the United States seems to be getting done with this whole fiasco. Unfortunately, there are other places in the world who are not so fortunate. If you have been paying attention to the news, you probably know and understand that India is having a recent resurgence of the COVID-19 virus, with nearly 2/3 of the people tested in India having shown exposure to COVID-19. As of the day of this recording, Wednesday, May 19th, India reported over 265,000 new daily infections, taking its tally to 25.5 million, the world's second highest after the United States. USA number 1, as always, with a death toll of 283,000 deaths. India, being one of the densely populated and packed countries on the planet, was subjected to a new variant of the virus, which has spread, causing, as you can assume, lots and lots of problems. There are just so many people in India, and with that many people, there are chances for the virus to run rampant and mutate further. In fact, there are fears that this new variant may just, once again, put us in another global pandemic situation, with India being one of the epicenters. As you can imagine, the Indian government is overwhelmed by this new and frightening situation. We have all been on the edge of our seats while the world responds to last year's pandemic, and it is situations like these where it feels like sometimes our world leaders are taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. It's unfortunate, but this is how the world is these days, folks. Sorry to say. There has been lots of criticism for India's leadership, whether it be founded or unfounded, but today I'd like to explore a particularly weird claim made by a member of India's parliament. BJP member of parliament, and BJP is one of the 2 major Indian political parties. Pragya Thakur has said that she takes cow urine every day and it has protected her from the coronavirus, and she is suggesting that other people do the same. Thakur was heard saying, and I quote, "If we have urine from an indigenous cow every day, then it cures lung infection from COVID. I am in deep pain, but I take cow urine every day. So now I don't have to take any medicine against corona, and I don't have corona." She further goes on to say cow urine is a lifesaver. Thakur is a self-proclaimed saint, and 2 years ago, she claimed that a mix of cow urine and other cow products had cured her cancer. So apparently she swears by this particularly unusual treatment. And I do want to specify, when she says that she takes cow urine, she means she drinks it. The verbiage of the articles I was reading was weird, and I was under the impression that maybe she was mainlining it, like she was shooting cow pee into her veins. This is also not a particularly outspoken idea, as other members of parliament and political figures in India have attested to drinking cow urine and it helping them stave off the virus. Of course, the Indian Medical Association has said there is no scientific evidence that cow urine helps with the treatment or prevention of COVID, and doctors all over the world have repeatedly warned against unproven alternative cures offered for COVID. Now, I am speaking as an ignorant American here, so please pardon my editorializing, but I do know that among many Indian people, the cow is seen as a sacred creature. And so culturally, I may be able to understand why the fluids or parts of this animal may provide some sort of cultural maybe sign of hope for just a miracle cure for a disease that has ravaged a lot of people. But that being said, this seems to me like snake oil. Maybe that's insensitive, but I do feel like we should go with the science here, and I wouldn't particularly consider or recommend anybody drink another animal's pee for any reason. And I mean, who am I to talk? Even last year, our former president Trump made the bold question to doctors of if injecting our veins with bleach would have some sort of effect on the virus. What I mean to say is there's no judgments on my part, but there are medical and science professionals who are saying that ingesting cow urine or using any other sort of alternative, non-verified or tested cure for COVID is particularly irresponsible for a number of obvious reasons. And once again, this incident in India is not isolated. In March of 2020, the All India Hindu Union hosted a cow urine drinking party in New Delhi attended by 200 people. So this does seem to be a popular claim. However, once again, medical boards and scientific organizations suggest that you do not use this as an alternative cure to COVID. But India is not the only location around the world that has suggested perhaps unusual alternative forms of COVID control. Similarly, there are several places around the Middle East that have suggested drinking camel urine. And with any scary illness, or really any illness whatsoever, there are a lot of people popping up with homeopathic and esoteric alternative remedies. I hate to throw around the word snake oil again, but you can look up a long list of people who are making claims of a certain herb or a particular elixir or applying flowers to certain unmentionable parts of your body as a means to prevent or even cure COVID. There are people out there who even think that ingesting enough vitamin C will prevent or cure COVID, which this is a thing that they really tried to sell me on as a kid, like everything had vitamin C in it. And I mean, vitamin C is a pretty good way to bolster your immune system, but it's not a cure. There's vitamin C in everything, so you can't just overdose on vitamin C and cure or prevent a disease. And as I said previously, the United States is not immune to perhaps hysterical claims of curing or preventing the affections of the pandemic. Who can forget last year when televangelist Kevin Copeland urged followers to touch their televisions as a means of vaccination by proxy, and then seemed to do a magic god spell that prevented his listeners and watchers from getting COVID. It is really funny. It was a bit of a meme, and I've brought it up here. We're going to go ahead and take a listen.
In the name of Satan, you bow your knee.
That's about enough for now, but if you haven't seen that, I would definitely look up the Kenneth Copeland Wind of God video. It's only about a minute long, so you don't have to subject yourself to it too much. And hey, maybe by watching it, you'll prevent yourself from getting COVID. I laugh, but of course, unproven, untested alternative cures for something that has created a global pandemic could potentially be dangerous. I'm not an expert. I can't tell you either way if the wind of God or drinking cow urine or over-ingesting vitamin C is going to heal you of this horrible, terrible virus. But for the time being, I am inclined to listen to and pay attention to people who are a lot more qualified and smarter than I on the subject. Use your best judgment, people. We're all in this together. I cannot be the only one thinking that I am eager to be done with this whole situation. It has become a constant conversation in all of our lives. The world was totally rocked by it. So many people's lives were completely uprooted. I don't have to tell you this, you guys. It's just when I hear that there are still countries that are dealing with it, my heart just goes out to them in such a strong way. The people of India, I feel so very sorry for you. And this is coming from a member of the country who has the number one cases and deaths, of course. So I hope to all of you the best. We are all going to get through this together. I promise. We're all on the same team, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like your neighbor is on the same team as you. When it comes down to the human race as a whole getting sick, we got to band together, guys. Let's just do it. Anyway, that is enough of my postulating. So many times I feel like I'm stepping too far up on that soapbox, and for that I do apologize. To you, my dear listeners, I am only your lowly and humble weird news reporter. And after we get back from the break, Gwyneth Paltrow is once again seeing some heat after her company Goop has been accused of selling a customer another exploding candle. Yes, you heard that right. Another exploding candle. And I'm going to try and talk about this as sensitively as I can because there's a particular quality about this candle that makes me laugh. And after that, we are going through some strange execution methods. And at the end of the show, we are doing our top 5 lesser known famous criminals. Bit of an oxymoron, but it's possible you may not have heard of these guys before. And I found them very interesting. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and we'll be back after the break.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. It's me, friends, Mark Swan. It's so good to talk to you today. Before the break, we were talking about some of the weird claims of alternative COVID treatment, including but not limited to drinking cow urine and other weird strategies. I myself am not necessarily opposed to alternative treatments for things like stress or sleeping. Like, I'll light some incense if I am feeling a little bit anxious, or I'll drink some tea or something. But I've never really been one for the homeopathic methods of treatment for ailments. To each their own. We are, after all, weird creatures who just had the luck of the evolutionary draw to start thinking and developing the world beyond our instincts and our scopes. Nobody really knows what's going on, but I do think there are people who know better than others. The reason why I bring up alternative treatments and products for the human lifestyle is for our next story. You may be well aware that movie star Gwyneth Paltrow has recently expanded her reach beyond Hollywood to become something of an entrepreneur. The Marvel movie star and longtime celebrity is owner, operator, and executive of her founded Goop company. According to Goop's website, in 2008, Gwyneth Paltrow launched Goop from her kitchen as a homespun weekly newsletter. It's grown a lot since then. We operate from a place of curiosity and non-judgment, and we start hard conversations, crack open taboos, and look for connection and resonance everywhere we can find it. We don't mind being the tip of the spear. In short, we go first so you don't have to. We're glad you're here. Goop offers a wide range of products ranging from clothes to beauty products to wellness products. Wellness, of course, sometimes being a shorthand for alternatives to traditional means to deal with health concerns or even just emotional or psychological well-being. Goop prides itself on using ingredients that are alternative to the norm. The company claims that their beauty products are free of toxic ingredients, and many of their consumable products focus on having vitamins and supplements that you may not use in your everyday life to supposedly make improvements to your bodily health. Goop also offers food recipes and things like exercise regimens for the sake of consumers making changes to their lifestyle. As part of their wellness campaign, they invest in ideas like alternative sweeteners and recipes that cut out unnecessary fats, common allergens, and cooked and prepared using techniques all for dietary wellness. Goop has expanded into a huge company, being a purveyor of clothes, having a podcast, having a show on Netflix. I haven't watched it. They offer perfumes and colognes. They are, all in all, a pretty successful business, probably due in part to not only Gwyneth Paltrow's hard work, but also her fame. Of course, when you have a high-profile company like Goop, there are bound to be some controversies. Goop has been under scrutiny for a number of topics, notably that they are a particularly expensive brand. Goop products appear to be marketed towards higher-class people, maybe people a bit more like Gwyneth Paltrow in style and execution. We are currently living in a time where there is a need and insistence on using higher quality and healthier ingredients, but with that insistence, there's a price point. Goop uses a lot of ingredients in all of its consumable products that have been proven to be healthy and good for the human body, but they are expensive just in their usage. And I'm not really here to argue whether that should be the case, but when you have such a charismatic spokesperson like Gwyneth Paltrow purveying products that she claims are objectively good and healthy for you, and then follows up that claim with such a high price point, I think you can see why some people would be critical. Further still, there are people who are critical of Goop's execution simply because their philosophy is a bit homeopathic and new wave, if you'd like to use a term like that. The company on more than one occasion has described itself as revolutionary, and hey, you are welcome to make that claim, but when you are an A-list celebrity with a huge multi-million-dollar company, it's hard to get the public to consider you a revolutionary in the way that you want them to. That's a bold claim on my part, but I think that's the case. And speaking of revolutionary, in 2020, Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop released a series of candles with a particularly weird name. Now, I've said this in the past, we are a safe for work podcast, so I am not going to give the full name of this launched series of candles. I'll just give you a hint that the name of this candle refers to a certain part of the biological female anatomy, and specifically Gwyneth Paltrow's part of anatomy. The candle is called This Smells Like My, and well, you can guess the rest. And indeed, when you take a look at the candle, it has a label on the front that says quite plainly, "This smells like my," well, you know. As to the question whether the candle really does smell like Gwyneth, she has made the statement that it is not only a joke, but what she calls a punk rock statement made specifically to counter the body shaming that women face in their everyday lives. It is a product with a name meant to shock and awe it did, as whether or not it really smells like Gwyneth Paltrow, the candle pretty much sold out its first run almost immediately. And for the record, this humble podcast host does not have one of these candles, so I can't vouch either way whether it smells like Gwyneth Paltrow, and I would have to have some sort of frame of reference, which I do not. The candle sold for $75 and was described as having a funny, gorgeous, sexy, and beautifully unexpected scent, and was made with geranium, citrusy bergamot, and cedar absolutes, juxtaposed with damask rose and ambrette seed to put us in mind of fantasy seduction and a sophisticated warmth. Sure, Gwyneth. I personally am hard-pressed to believe that you made a product that refers to a very private part of your body and sold it for $75 and you didn't know exactly what you were doing. If any celebrity sells a product that refers to their anatomy, it's probably pretty likely that there are going to be people of all walks of life who want it for one reason or another. I don't really want to get into it. Instead, I will skeptically inform you, the dear listener, that the story does not end here. A Texas man is suing Goop, claiming that he bought one of these candles and it exploded. The man, a Mr. Colby Watson, claims that after burning the candle for about 3 hours on his bedside table, the candle exploded and engulfed in flame. According to Colby, it left a black burn ring on his bedside table and the candle jar was charred and black. Luckily for him and anyone around him, there were no injuries reported. Goop is responding to the lawsuit, claiming it is frivolous and that their website even has a warning advising people not to burn the candle for more than 2 hours. I'm not terribly sure if this is a common thing for candles. Like, are you really at risk for candles exploding if you burn them for a set amount of time? I'm going to go find a candle real quick. I'll be right back. All right, I went and found a candle. It is a Tuscany Candle. I am not an advocate, nor am I paid by Tuscany to bring this candle in here to talk about it. It does not smell like anybody's body. It is a farmhouse spice with essential oils and warm autumn spices candle. It does have a warning on the bottom. This is just one candle that you would burn just to make the house smell a little bit better. It says, warning, burn candle within sight. Keep away from things that catch fire. Keep away from children and pets. Always leave at least 20 centimeters between burning candles. You must trim the wick to 1/4 inch each time the candle is to be relit. Avoid using it in drafty areas. Place on temperature-safe surface. Container will be hot. Extinguish. Do not use the lid to extinguish the flame. I do that. Do not burn longer than 4 hours at a time. So this does seem to be a common warning for a candle to not burn it beyond a certain amount of time. I actually didn't know that. However, I wonder if that warning is usually there because people will forget about a candle if they let it burn after a certain time, or if there really is a risk of just a candle reaching a certain physical state where it explodes. And as far as the Gwyneth Paltrow body candle is concerned, they are claiming that it is up to the product's performance and safety standards through rigorous industry testing. And I was legitimately ready to argue that claim until I saw that there's a similar warning on a candle that I own. So, hey, at least I did my research, man. And apparently Colby Watson did his research as well, as he knew there was a limited warning on the website, but he says that Goop knew that the candles were defective. The Texas claimant is seeking a jury trial and triple compensation, as well as punitive damages of more than $5 million for he and others who, through no fault of their own, purchased defective and dangerous body-scented candles. And unfortunately for Goop, this is not the first time something like this has happened. A woman in the UK also says that her Goop candle exploded in January after only lighting it for a few minutes. According to her account, which I won't read verbatim, she described the candle acting almost like a firework. Like it fizzed and spat, and Goop is currently investigating the claim, seeing if the woman trimmed the wick properly and did not burn it for more than 2 hours. I suppose it is important for people to be very cognizant of something like a candle's warnings and how the instructions intend for it to be properly used. But that being said, when you buy a candle, you pretty much just should know how to do it. You open it up and you light the wick and you let it burn and it smells nice, or it smells like Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know. While proper safety warnings may save Goop from any litigation, I think it's important to understand that people are going to naturally ignore warning signs when a product is deemed safe, and candles they're a product that's deemed safe. it's a safe form of having fire in your house. As long as you know not to be an idiot with it and wave it around or throw it at something, you should have the expectation that it's not going to do something like explode, as these claims say theirs had. This is a developing story, and I assume we are going to find out more as things go on. I have no idea why the candle would explode. I'm not a scientist. I'm a podcast host. I would have to assume that with Goop's history with alternative ingredients and substances that they use in their products, perhaps there's something in the candle wax or the wick or the way that the candle is formed that there could just be an increased chance of an explosion if you leave it lit for too long. And Colby of Texas, I'm not making any judgments, but I do have to ask why you bought the Gwyneth Paltrow anatomy candle in the first place. Were you doing it for the meme? Were you doing it because you are a sincere and devout believer in the Goop philosophy? Or was there something more sinister going on, Colby? I have to ask. I'm just not trusting of the human race, really. Whichever way you slice it, I imagine that Gwyneth Paltrow and her Goop company were hoping for the This Smells Like My Body candle to be controversial, but not particularly in this way. And even though Goop is a regular receiver of controversy and scrutiny, they are still a successful company. So all the best to Gwyneth and her weird ideas. All things considered, I salute something like a This Smells Like My Whatever candle as a genuine means to making a statement that you want to make. And if this is about body positivity, then all good for you. I'm more used to finding candles like that at like a Spencer's in the mall, and it being a joke candle that does not smell good. On one hand, I'm a little critical of celebrities who pull stunts like this. Like, you know what you're doing with your fame and power and money, and perhaps it's manipulative to have a product like that for any type of person to buy. On the other hand, if you got it, flaunt it, I guess. If you can make a product like this that is funny, poignant, makes a statement, is obviously meant to cause controversy and talk, and is just otherwise there to stir the pot, as it were, I guess I salute you. But hey, maybe work on making sure your candles don't explode. I think maybe I'm looking too far into it. Anyway, you've been listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. And hey, did you know you could find us on social media? I am on Twitter and Instagram every day, asking the weird questions, and I would love your contribution as a listener and an absorber of the weird. Maybe find me on social media and tell me what weird celebrity product you've bought in the past. Have you let a celebrity fool you into buying some sort of energy juice or something? I don't know. Celebrities exist for a reason. They're here to market towards us, and none of us are immune. After the break, a new South Carolina decision allows death row inmates to choose their method of execution. We're going to explore that a little bit, and then maybe we'll go into some famous last words. And then later on the end of the show, I'm going to go through 5 lesser-known famous criminals. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mark Swan, and hey, I say it every time, but I'm going to say it again. When I say GSMC Podcast Network, I mean that we are a large assortment of podcast hosts and enthusiasts covering a wide array of topics on a number of different podcasts. I personally like the book review podcast and the music podcast, and I love having conversations with those guys on Twitter. And hey, like I was saying before the break, you can have a conversation with me on Twitter. Also, please just look up the GSMC Weird News Podcast on Twitter. Hit me up. My name's Mark, and I am one of many hosts. We've had kind of a sad episode today, kind of a gross episode. Before the break, we were talking exploding candles that smell like Gwyneth Paltrow's anatomy. And before that, we were talking drinking cow urine to stave off COVID. And I don't know which of those two topics was yuckier. I'm not sure. I guess the Gwyneth Paltrow candle does not technically actually smell like her, according to her claim. And I really am not willing to test out that claim either. And I hate to say it, folks, but the episode is not going to get any happier on this segment. Kind of a morose one this week. Sorry, guys. Our next segment takes us to Columbia, South Carolina, where Governor Henry McMaster has signed into law a bill that forces death row inmates, for now, to choose between the electric chair or a newly formed firing squad in hopes that they can restart executions after an involuntary 10-year pause. South Carolina is famous for its enthusiasm towards capital punishment, but a lack of lethal injection drugs have brought executions in the state to a halt. Death by lethal injection has been considered the most modern and humane way to sentence criminals with maximum punishment. The method has replaced the electric chair and other means of execution across all of the United States who still use capital punishment. However, apparently South Carolina ran out of its batch of lethal injection drugs in 2013, and its last execution took place in 2011. Ever since, Carolina cites that it has been incredibly difficult to get further lethal injection drugs as manufacturers no longer want their products used in executions. The ironic result of this lack of injection drugs means that there are inmates waiting on South Carolina's death row who simply cannot follow through with their intended sentences. This is why South Carolina has made the controversial decision to go back to more archaic means of execution. It is rare for a legal execution to be enacted these days without the use of lethal injection, and although there are states like Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Utah who still technically employ the use of a firing squad, only 3 have been executed by that method since 1977. As for the electric chair, there are still 8 states in the union, including South Carolina, that use it as a means for execution. However, lethal injection is still the preferred method of execution by far. According to officials, the electric chair in South Carolina's system is already up and running and ready to be used, and they are currently doing research into employing and enacting a firing squad. I feel insensitive for the chuckle, but I am curious how they would go about hiring a group of people to enact a legal firing squad. Do you find them on Craigslist or something? Do you make a posting on Indeed? Is there a firing squadman on LinkedIn who is just looking for that next gig? And it is hard for me to think about the electric chair without being reminded of that horrible scene from The Green Mile with Michael Clark Duncan. This also begs the question, if South Carolina ran out of lethal injection drugs and they are having a difficult time even finding a replacement, does that mean that other states are soon going to follow suit? Are we just going to run out of lethal injection drugs as a whole, and then we're going to have to find an alternative for capital punishment? I won't give my personal opinion either way, but perhaps this will be the road to eliminating the idea of capital punishment. It's certainly just as likely that for the time being, states would probably take the South Carolina route and use older methods. I mean, the electric chair has been used in execution for so long that it's basically a time-honored tradition in America. I guess I'm hoping that if we lose access to this quote-unquote humane way of ending a person's life, maybe it will start a new discussion. Who knows? Of course, with this decision in South Carolina, it is not without its complications. Several death row inmates are in fact suing because they were originally sentenced to death by lethal injection, and they are claiming that it is unlawful for their deaths to be transferred to these new means. Basically, they're saying, hey, the court ruled we would die this way. Now you're saying that we are going to die this way, and that is unlawful. Of course, these new laws were enacted in the first place because these death row inmates were basically put in line on indefinite hold because there was no legal or lawful way to kill them. So if you're on death row and there's no way to legally end your life, then you indefinitely get to stay alive. I could say that their suing is possibly a strategy to extend their life. But of course, it does come into question the specificity of the law if a court rules one thing and then determines another by proxy. Just how fair is that to the person who that law affects? Because of previous interpretations of the law, there are inmates who have opted out of the older form of electric chair execution in favor of lethal injection. But since there's no way to kill them by lethal injection, they are not allowed to be killed by the electric chair. It's all very confusing. These inmates have attempted to appeal to these transforming laws in the past, but 2 of the 3 are out of formal appeals, and that is why they are referring to a lawsuit. Arguments from the legal teams of these inmates suggest that the law is so vague that the process and consequences of the election's decision are unclear to a person of ordinary intelligence. Supporters on the opposite end say that the death penalty remains legal in South Carolina and the state owes it to the family of the victims to find a way to carry out punishment. Dear listener, I cannot make assumptions on your opinions of the death penalty, but situations like this can get strange and confusing, and there may not be a right or wrong answer, but it does demand a conversation. There are those out there who would argue that the act of killing another human being for the sake of capital punishment is in itself inhumane, and would argue that something as painless as lethal injection is still not humane enough to demand the term. I do, however, have to question the return of the firing squad. I know that this was a method of execution that was never really retired, but it's something that's what we used to do to people in opposite armies hundreds of years ago. Whose bright idea was it in South Carolina to bring back the firing squad, and why did they vote it back into inaction? I do have to question that. In addition to the potential errors that could come from a misfiring, or even if you have 5 people shooting at one man, they don't hit him lethally, I question the psychological effects it could have on the shooters themselves. I am not nearly qualified enough to have a horse in this fight. I simply find it weird that we, in modern times, are bringing back something like a firing squad because we don't have humane methods in our disposal to take care of prisoners who have wronged done others. I've always been intrigued and weirded out by the concept of the death penalty. There's so many ideas around it that are weird explorations of the human condition and how we all interact with each other. Like, for instance, the last meal. The idea behind a prisoner no longer possessing the right to live by the state's mandate, but they are given enough dignity to be able to choose what they get to eat for the very last time. It's a strange amount of kindness right before a very, very dramatic act of brutality. And in fact, there are weird and famous cases of death row inmates having famous last meals, including Timothy McVeigh, the 1995 Oklahoma City bomber. His last meal was 2 pints of Ben & Jerry's mint chocolate chip ice cream. And John Wayne Gacy, the notorious killer clown, had a bucket of KFC chicken, French fries, and a pound of strawberries as his last meal. There are also urban legends of cannibals asking to eat a human being for their last meal. These were, of course, denied according to legend. And that's the thing. The state, if they put you to death, they'll offer you a last meal, and it can be whatever you want within reason, but they are allowed to deny you your last meal, and you have to think of an alternative. I wish I had thought of the social media question. What would be your last meal? Good social media. But, you know, I didn't think of it in time. I feel bad about that. Maybe you can answer that next time. Maybe I'll pause up the question on Twitter and Instagram and see if I get any hits, and we'll read it in a future episode. And how can I mention last meals without mentioning famous last words? Good old Ben Franklin's last words were, "A dying man can do nothing easily," after his daughter asked him to move position on his bed so that he could breathe easier. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's last words were, "You are wonderful," as he turned to his wife. That's sweet. Similarly, movie star John Wayne's last words were to his wife, and he said, "Of course I know who you are. You're my girl. I love you." Groucho Marx, another famous old movie star, said in true Marx Brothers fashion, "This is no way to live." And I'll end it with this one. Winston Churchill's last words were, "I'm bored with it all." Well, Winston, you got a solution to your boredom. I wonder if these people who have such prolific identities in society think about what their last words would be. I wonder if anybody out there is thinking about their last meal. My last meal would probably be, if I had to choose at this moment, a hamburger and fries and a chocolate malt. That's kind of boring. I don't know. Anyway, the concept of death will forever be a weird and interesting topic that I am always happy to touch on the GSMC Weird News podcast. South Carolina, I sincerely hope you figure out what is going to work for your judicial system. It sounds like you have a complex predicament ahead of you, at least for the next few months. I am hard-pressed to imagine a world in which we are running out of our humane lethal injection drugs and are trying to find an alternative. I'm curious if there are those in South Carolina and other parts of the world that are considering new and more humane methods of execution, whatever that may mean. I know there have been studies into euthanasia or killing of another being by way of replacing oxygen in the air with another gas. Apparently, the human body is terrible at detecting when oxygen is leaving the surrounding system, and there have been ideas proposed to filling a room slowly with nitrogen gas and depriving it of oxygen. Therefore, a person would die quickly and painlessly and without their knowledge. Of course, when I say without their knowledge, usually a person on death row knows they are going to die. I don't think there is an apt method to removing the fear and anxiety that comes with having your last moments. Maybe I should move away from this subject. Not sure who listens to podcasts to contemplate the ever-present looming threat of death. But hey, true crime is one of the most famous genres of the podcast media, and that's why after the break, I am opening up The Crime Book by the Big Ideas Simply Explained series. Once again, I found this on sale. I'm so stoked on it, and I've read through quite a few entries, and we're moving from the more morose side of crime to maybe the fun or informative side of crime, because when we get back, we are going to go over 5 lesser-known criminals and their harrowing adventures in disobeying the law. Maybe you've heard of some of these people, maybe you haven't, but regardless, I am so excited to share the information with you. And once again, if you have any ideas for weird news or topics, please hit us up on social media. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast, and we will be right back after the break.
The The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mark Swan, and we're just about to wrap up today. Hopefully I didn't make y'all too depressed. That certainly wasn't my intent. They can't all be happy-go-lucky, famous escapee zoo episodes. Sometimes the weird news out there is relevantly sad. Oh well. But hey, maybe I can pick up your spirits a little bit with tales of daring do-bad. Perhaps I can scintillate you with fables of ne'er-do-wells with good and bad intentions. Perhaps I could tell you a Robin Hood story from any other part of the world. And at the end of the day, we can all live, laugh, love together. In all seriousness, though, podcasts and true crime go together like chocolate and peanut butter. That's the apt simile, correct? Who knew that this would be such a relevant and popular drama to talk about real-life crime in an entertaining manner? What do we as human beings find so fascinating about people who don't obey the law and the real consequences that happen to everything around that particular situation? And here's the thing, what about people who find like serial killers sexy? What is that about? Didn't Zac Efron recently play a serial killer? Gosh, I gotta look this up so I don't look like an idiot. That's right, he played Ted Bundy. I forgot about that. And people were all about it. There were people calling Zac Efron sexy for playing Ted Bundy. People were calling Ted Bundy sexy. It's sexier than Zac Efron. It's like, you know what these people did, right? Like, they did crimes against humanity. They were violent and against the social norms. I guess there really is that Robin Hood sort of sensation. We are always in love with the rogue as a society. Maybe it's because we are jealous of them. Whether they're real entities or not, they're doing things that we would never do because we are either used to or like conforming to social norms. It just gets kind of weird when we start idolizing murderers or sexualizing murderers or being attracted to murderers. Like, I can acknowledge that a person has attractive value, but then you hear that they, kill people and put them in their fridges. And then they're ultimately caught in modern times and they're subjected to a firing squad from the year 1912. And what about the murderers who don't get caught? Like the Zodiac Killer, whose infamous final note was actually very recently finally decoded. For those of you not in the loop, the Zodiac Killer was an enigmatic murderer who killed several people in California in the late 1960s. He left the police several notes in code, and one wasn't decoded until 51 years later, very recently. I'm not going to get too much into it because this isn't a Zodiac Killer episode, but I will read the note since many people have tried to decode it for years and years. It says, and I quote, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Well, I have news for you, Zodiac Killer. We don't do gas chambers here. We do firing squads and electric chairs. And we certainly don't do painless lethal injection because the drugs don't exist anymore. Anyway, I am over here critiquing people who enjoy the true crime genre when I myself am a big fan. I listen to the podcast that everybody listens to. I will not name them here per my agreement with my producer. But I am enthralled by the stories of true life criminals and the adventures that they go through. And that is why I recently picked up and have the pleasure of reading the Big Ideas Simply Explained crime book. This is a conglomerative encyclopedia of crime throughout the ages, presented in an exciting graphical format. There's lots of snippets of information and cool pictures. As I said at the beginning of the show, I think this is a book aimed at younger adult readers, maybe teenagers. But I do recommend picking it up if you are a fan of crime, because there is just so much to read about. In the introduction, it explains crimes, the illegal actions that can be prosecuted and are punishable by law, are all around us, from comparatively petty misdemeanors to truly heinous acts of unspeakable evil. The perpetrator of these very transgressions have long fascinated academics and the wider public, who have sought answers to questions about whether some people are more likely to commit crimes rather than others, and whether there are certain characteristics unique to criminals. And further than that, dear listeners, I think that people just like solving mysteries. A criminal at large is a real-life entity that can propose the unknown to the general public, and I think there are those of us out there, me included, that have our Sherlock Holmes fantasies, and we want to prove to ourselves how smart we are by figuring something out that other people haven't. Like I was saying about the Zodiac Killer and his undecoded note, that has been a subject of debate constantly since its debut 50 years ago. We are curious, naked apes out there with big growing brains, and we get frustrated when we can't figure something out. And when there are people out there who are trying to commit their misdeeds with as few people knowing as possible, and especially entities of the law, I don't know. We just get really interested in that topic. And that's the other thing. For every Robin Hood, there's a sheriff of Nottingham who is the law figure who is also bad. And maybe we like being fascinated with criminals because we secretly want the criminal to be changing society for the better, and maybe we're rebelling against the authority. I don't know, guys. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just looking far too into it. But I did want to share with you some selections from the crime book today, and I love doing things in list format because this is the internet, and that's how we all talk to each other these days. Nobody makes articles anymore, folks. We all make listicles. Also, before we get into it, I want to comment that I don't like the word listicle. It sounds kind of naughty. That's why I'm bringing you 5 cases of criminals you may not have heard before, who nevertheless made an impact on the world in a exciting and adventurous way. Number 5 on our list is Victor Lustig and his sale of the Eiffel Tower. Yes, you heard that right. Mr. Lustig was a French con man known notably for selling an invention that printed $100 bills. He convinced gullible victims that the device took several hours of processing to print 2 $100 bills that he presented to the targets. In fact, they were simply real $100 bills that he had loaded into the machine without their knowledge. Because of Victor's silver tongue, his victims bought his machines for as much as $30,000. Of course, after 2 hours, the victims would realize that the machine was bunk and Victor would be long gone. This, however, was not Victor Lustig's claim to fame, as in 1925, Lustig read a newspaper story about how the Eiffel Tower was rusting and required repairs. Ever the quick thinker, Lustig sent out letters on fake government stationery to businessmen in which he claimed to be the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. In the letters, he asked for a meeting at the Hotel de Crillon and discuss a business contract. Believing the opportunity to be genuine, the men all met with smartly dressed, courteous Lustig. He revealed that the government intended to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal and would take bids for the right to demolish the tower. At the end of the whole debacle, Victor was able to con one of the men out of $70,000. He later moved to the U.S. to continue his criminal career. I want a movie about this guy. Number 4 on our list takes us all the way back to the 17th century. John Nevison, aka Swift Nick, was a highwayman with an incredible escape. After robbing a traveler near Kent, UK, Nevison was in desperate need of an alibi, so he devised a cunning plan. He crossed the Thames River and galloped 200 miles to York in a single day, then engaged the Lord Mayor of York in a conversation and made a bet over a game of bowls. Podcasters note, I don't know what a game of bowls is. I kind of want to look it up, but we might be running low on time here. Nevison made sure during this mysterious game of bowls that the mayor knew exactly the time that they were playing, and he was able to exploit this cunning plan as a perfect alibi. So, when his robbing victim came looking for Nevison, Nevison was able to rely on the mayor to vouch for him, basically. So, in summation, a 200-mile traversal and a meeting with a faithful mayor equals a really solid alibi. Nevison was seen as a charismatic figure with lots of skill, and there were people who considered it an honor to be robbed by him. Number 3. In the 1960s, Bill Mason led a tremendously weird double life. By day, he was a property manager, but by night, he was a notorious cat burglar. According to the book, he scaled walls, tiptoed across parapets, clambered onto balconies, and shimmied through barely open windows. On one of his more recognized adventures, he climbed 15 floors up to the outside of the apartment building of oil tycoon Dr. Armand Hammer. And by the way, Dr. Armand Hammer sounds like a character from Clue, maybe, where he found the balcony door unlocked. He tossed the contents of Mrs. Hammer's jewelry box, worth several $1 million, into one of her pillowcases. Reportedly, Mason used a grappling hook to escape the building, and he very diligently covered up his tracks. Police were not able to identify a single suspect. Over the span of 20 years, Bill Mason robbed celebrities, the Hollywood elite, and athletes. Among his loot, he was able to steal an Olympic gold medal and over $100 million in jewelry. Mason was eventually caught in a sting operation and later wrote the memoir Confessions of a Master Jewel Thief, published in 2003. I'll have to pick that up. Number 2 on our list brings us back to India, where the show started. You know, I like making circles. Phoolan Devi, a teenage gang member, had been kidnapped by a rival, largely high-caste gang in Bamai. Devi was locked up and assaulted and was arranged to be married to one of her captors on Valentine's Day in 1981. With the help of 2 of her gang members, she escaped her capture and returned with her gang to overwhelm her rivals and shoot them dead one by one. The harrowing story resulted in Devi becoming a Robin Hood figure among the India lower caste system. She very quickly became leader of her local gang, carrying out dozens of raids and highway robberies, attacking and looting upper caste villages, and kidnapping rich people for ransom. Oftentimes, she and her gang would redistribute the stolen wealth to poorer villages. Devi spent 2 years evading capture by the police, but soon surrendered, and during her high-profile arrest, she was applauded by a massive crowd who appreciated her service. After being released from jail some years later, in a twist of fate, Devi actually ran for parliament, and in 1996, she was elected. Imagine that. Her platform was, of course, helping the lower classes and downtrodden. She would go on to lose the seat in Parliament and then win it again in 2007. So, once again, just another person I want to see a movie. This is such a cool story. The final entry on today's list is Scottish economist John Law and his Mississippi scheme. Law proposed major reforms to the Scottish banking system in 1705 and designated to reduce public debt and stimulate the economy. These included the use of paper currency as money instead of gold. Law founded a national bank that accepted gold and silver deposits and issued banknotes in return. In 1717, he created a company with exclusive rights to develop France's U.S. territories in the Mississippi River Valley. By 1719, the company controlled all of the country's colonial colonial trade. He then undertook a radical restructuring of France's debt. He devised his Mississippi scheme, selling shares in his company, the value of which he had greatly exaggerated, in exchange for state-issued public securities. Investors flocked to buy shares, and their price rose sharply. This scheme led for the stock markets across Europe to go wild, and it very heavily disrupted the French economy. After a bout of massive inflation, in 1720, the value of the Mississippi stock plunged, causing a major financial crash. Law fled to Venice, where he died in poverty 9 years later. You may be wondering why this is my number one on this list, and it's because this happened in the 1700s. And things don't seem to change. We still have similar schemes like the Mississippi scheme to this day. Oh boy, it just goes to show you that crime can emerge from any type of person in any place and in any time. Listen, once again, this is the Big Ideas Simply Explained crime book. I definitely recommend a read, if not a purchase. It tells of more popular crimes throughout the ages. The Charles Manson murders are in there, as well as the escape from Alcatraz, but it is such a good read, quick, easy to follow, and lots of information in a little bit of space. Hey, we made it to the end of the show, and hopefully we weren't too sad or grossed out. It's been a fun one for me. I hope it's been a fun one for you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and good night.